Now, just before I start this video, I'm just gonna let you all know that I'm very unwell at the moment, so my voice was very strained during some of these recordings, so if I don't sound 100% normal, you know why. Now that's out of the way, let's begin.
I could have been an orphan. I could have been dead. When I was 2, my mother, 20 at the time, was already a single parent. My parents had split the year before. At the time, we lived with another student from the nursing program my mother was attending. The roommate, Emily, was very smart. My mom had to study hard for her grades, but Emily was one of those people who could read a passage once and remember it. One Thursday night, Emily was trying to convince my mom to go out drinking with her, but Mom had a bunch of studying to do. Still, she didn't want to spend the night alone in the house, so she decided to go spend the night with my grandparents. The next day, Emily wasn't in class. When Mom got home, Emily's car wasn't there, but Mom didn't think much of it until she found Emily's purse. When Mom found out, she knew something was wrong. She decided to call the pharmacy where Emily worked as an assistant, and they told Mom that she hadn't showed up to work, and also to tell her that she was fired. Mom decided to call her boyfriend at the time, who later became my stepfather, and he came over to take a look around. When he found a broken window in the bathroom, he told Mom to call the police. The police arrived pretty quickly, this being a farm town in the south, and searched Emily's room. They pulled back the covers on her bed. Her sheets were soaked with blood. That's when Mom realized that Emily was dead. The police found her abandoned car out on a country road. Emily's body was found in a field nearby. She'd been raped and stabbed to death. Mom was, for good reason, terrified and decided to move back in with my grandparents. Eventually, the police found the man who'd murdered Emily. As it turned out, he didn't get his intended target that night. No, he'd been watching my mom for some time. He had even posed as a potential buyer of the house Mom and Emily were renting, and toured it with a real estate agent. In court, he tried to get this crazy letter that was supposed to be for my mom admitted as evidence. Anyway, the man got life in prison and my mom is supposed to be notified whenever he's released. She no longer lives in fear. This happened in 1985. I can't help but wonder what would have happened to me if she decided to stay home. Would I still be alive? Would I have grown up without a mother? I ache when I think about the terror Emily must have experienced, but at the same time, I'm glad it wasn't us, and I feel a little guilty about that.
Trust Your Overwhelming Gut Feelings by Lolly Dot. I am a female. This incident happened when I was in college. I was 20. I lived in a big city where I went to school, and I used my car more than public transport since I needed to transport a lot of materials back and forth from my apartment's campus. I was doing a sculpture major. So one weekend, I had been working late in the studio and decided to stop at a 24-hour drugstore chain on my drive home to pick up a few things. It was pretty late, probably about 2 AM, so there wasn't any other customers in the store, but there were 2 male cashiers around my age. After I'd been there about 3 minutes, a new customer entered the store. He was male, in his late 30s, kinda jittery looking. He noticed me and started following me around the store in a really obvious way. I was trying to ignore him and get my stuff and get out of there. He then come up to me and started doing this psst noise like he was trying to discreetly get my attention. I kept ignoring him. Then he said, "Screw you, you stupid woman," and left the store. I just figured, whatever, you weirdo. As I paid for my stuff, I had this overwhelming gut feeling to ask the cashier if he wouldn't mind walking with me to my car, since that jittery guy had really creeped me out. The cashier said it was cool and we made our way to the parking lot. So I'm feeling more and more at ease, and about halfway to my car, I then turned to say thanks to the cashier for his help, and he then grabs my arm and says, "That guy is under your car." Surely enough, that guy was literally under my car. The cashier shouts, "What are you doing? I'm phoning the police." The jittery guy then starts scrambling out from under my car, and the cashier guy and me run back to the store and immediately call the cops. Now, it scared me pretty good. Unfortunately, he ran away before the cops could get there. Can you call off your dogs? By Bayer. The summer that I turned 7, I had a best friend, Em, who lived in the middle of nowhere on a big plot of land. Her mother grew up in Germany, but moved to the US in her 20s. She bred German Shepherds. I spent quite a lot of time at their house as a child. Occasionally, Em's mum would leave us at the house alone while she ran errands. The protection for us was the 3 dogs that were guarding the fenced-in yard. We would usually just watch TV or play Barbies until she got back. So one day, we were outside playing in the yard. There was a car that driven very slowly past us. It suddenly sped up after passing the house. A little while later, Em's mum had gone to town to return some library books or something. She had also taken Em's little sister with her, so that meant that we were left at home. I'm not sure how long we were alone before the phone rang, but I answered, even though it wasn't my house, because Em was painfully shy as a child and she refused to talk to anybody but close friends and relatives on the phone. An unfamiliar man then answered and said, "Hello? I am the electrician your mum hired. I have to come inside. Can you call off your dogs please and chain them up?" I panicked a little because something about this man made me feel uneasy, and Em's mum hadn't said anything to us about coming to work on the house. Plus, this was before cell phones. How did he know about the dogs? I guess he could have had a phone in the car, but there were no vehicles parked outside the gate, and the dogs weren't even barking or in sight. When Em's mum returned, she confirmed that she did not hire anybody to come to the property. None of us have any idea who he was or even how he got the number, but he never called back. Scary Substitute, but definitely not an emu. I was in primary school, so about 10 years old. Anyway, this woman explains that our teacher is ill and that she's going to be covering for us. No big deal. It happens all the time and we just crack on with our work. So then, for the next few hours, she gets stranger and stranger. It starts off with her talking about God and how he can see us and that he starts talking to her. Then she starts babbling on about how hanging makes us purer. She then makes sure that all of us draw people being hanged. She then starts walking around gently squeezing our necks occasionally with both her hands. Some of us said that we needed the loo and went to tell the headmaster instead. He appeared a few minutes later and after trying to get her out of the classroom, actually ends up having to physically wrestle her to get her out. We were left alone for 3 hours and nobody even moved. Later I was told by my mum that that teacher had a nervous breakdown.
When I was in middle school, our school bus would always drop us off at the bottom of a hill. My sister and I would walk about 4 or 5 blocks to our house with a few neighbourhood friends. It would take about 20 minutes give or take, but on most days I was always with someone. One day it was incredibly foggy, like you couldn't even see past a row of houses. I was dropped off at my usual spot, this time alone. My sister was at an after school program and the other kids seemed to have been at theirs as well. It didn't matter to me though, since I just had a short walk. As I began walking up the hill, I heard the faint sound of an engine growing closer behind me. Suddenly the accelerator stopped, so I turned around. This was your stereotypical kidnapping van you see on TV. Tinted windows in the front and none at the back. It seemed odd to me, but I kept walking my usual route. The van accelerated slowly, then stopped. I turned around to see that it would stay a good few meters closely to me. I repeated my walk a few times only to notice that whoever was in the van was following me. My body broke out in a cold sweat. I had 3 more blocks to go, and it seemed as if this van was going wherever I was. I remembered stranger danger in grade school and turned the corner of the block by me. Once I heard the van accelerate again, I went into a sprint and hid behind one of the houses nearby. I heard the van stop, but the engine kept running. After waiting a while, I could still hear it, waiting patiently. Terrified of being seen, I went through people's backyards until I reached my house. I still remember that moment today, and every so often it gives me chills thinking of what could have happened if I waited any longer. I felt like I was being examined and stalked, this person waiting to run out and grab me. Thankfully, I never saw that white van again, but I feel like I should have said something about it.
This is how easy it is for a crazy person to get into your house, by Chimp with a Limp. Back in my late teens in Dublin, Ireland, I used to head to a particular nightclub every single week and got to know most of the regulars there. It got to the point where I could literally walk to any table and I could at least know a few people there. So one night, I was introduced to a new woman that nobody really knew very well. I said hello and made very short and polite conversation with her, and then things went about normal. I was dancing and drinking. Nothing much of note happened during my time in the nightclub. At the end of the night, I left a little earlier than my friends because I lived really far away outside the city, so I had to get a really expensive taxi home and got into bed, falling into a deep sleep. I woke up the next morning, sunlight streaming into my room, and immediately knowing that something was wrong. Too much weight on the bed. I spun and looked down at the end of the room, and there sat on the end of the bed was the woman from the night before, just staring at me wide-eyed. She had this weird demented look on her. It was horrible. I had no idea what to say, so I said nothing. I was so weirded out by her expression, and the whole bizarre nature of this situation took over. I was dumbstruck. It wasn't a lustful look, it was a very spooky, obsessive, insane one. I know for a lot of guys the idea of having some random woman appear in their bedroom might be a thrill, but this was nothing like that. It was scary, plain and simple. I got up, got dressed, summoned a bit of courage and told her, "You're leaving now," and essentially marched her out of my house, telling her that the buses leave from the end of the road every half hour. She then left without saying a word. From talking to friends and family, I pieced together what happened. After I left that nightclub, she had tried to catch up with me, but instead lost me. She went back, asked around until somebody told her the rough area I lived in, and she then got a taxi. She then knocked on some random doors, waking up neighbours, and eventually one told her where I lived. She then lied to my sister, saying that I was expecting her to come in. From there, she got to my room and sat there for God knows how long, silently watching me. As it turns out, nobody from the club actually knew who she was. What really spooks me out though is that if she really wanted to hurt me, she could have done absolutely anything to me while I was asleep. To be honest, I'm lucky that I wasn't killed that night. I really don't like thinking about this. When I was 12, a man came to the door selling candy at 10 o'clock at night by Uncle Woody. When I was about 12, in the early 1980s, my dad once again got custody, so I went to live with him. My dad would occasionally go out at night on weekends with a hot date, etc. to leave me home alone. I really enjoyed it. No babysitter, nothing. I usually had a friend staying over or one of my brothers were there, so it wasn't that scary. One time though, I was home alone, and it got real scary. I also enjoyed being home alone on the weekend evenings because it gave me time to catch up with all of the latest R-rated movies. which my dad would otherwise not allow me to watch, of course. This particular night, I was watching Conan the Barbarian as it had just landed on HBO, so I dimmed the lights in the living room. At about 10 PM, the movie is about halfway over and there is a very loud knock on the front door. I was too short to use a peephole, so I ask who's there, and a man's voice says loudly, "You wanna buy some candy?" It was 10 o'clock at night, so I simply replied, "No thanks." 10 seconds then go by. I'm leaning with my ear on the door. He beats on the door again. This really startles me and made me jump up. "Do you want to buy some candy? Open the door." I said no, go away. He curses repeatedly. His voice sounds like a cross between Samuel L. Jackson and Ving Rhames. He leaves, but not for long. Confused? Shocked? I just go into the hallway and start listening. The rest of the house is a fortress, and my dad was a safety conscious person, always locking the windows and doors, etc. He was very afraid of being burglarized. When I would sometimes forget my house key, I was screwed because there was literally no way to sneak in. We lived in a cookie cutter development in a very safe urban area, but during the day, it was a ghost town. I mean, I was so shaken with fear when I realised how late it was and the fact that he was selling candy. I simply couldn't go back to watching my movie. I turned on all the lights and hid behind the couch. I think he's gone. Maybe. Suddenly, the man starts ringing the doorbell repeatedly. He's probably doing this for a solid minute. I'm frozen with fear behind the couch, clutching a steak knife. There was an adult at the door, not some friends or some kids playing a prank on me. I was sitting there terrified, but suddenly the doorbell episode stopped. He never come back after that. I never told my dad about it either, nor my brothers. I don't know why. It was so messed up that I pushed it out of my mind. As the time went by, it seemed to be more and more like a bad dream. I don't know what would have happened had I actually opened that door. The Gambler by Bulldog76. I'm a blackjack dealer at a tribal casino in Oklahoma. I've been put here as a dealer for the last 13 years. In this time, I've seen some pretty scary people, but nobody stands out more than this guy. So this guy is scary, and I'm not easily intimidated to say the least. He's about 6'2", medium built, has dirty blonde hair and big scars on his cheeks, and he reeks of Bud Light and Wilson cigars. He had a wife that always come in with him, and she always seemed to have fallen into something face first. He's a typical redneck idiot. He's not only mean to his wife, but he was hateful to everybody that he encountered. So one day, I was dealing him, and it wasn't going very well. I think I may have taken like $2,000 of his money, and that's when he started to call me things. When we encounter verbal abuse, we're allowed to have our pit boss have them removed from the tables. Now my pit boss is a woman, and he says, "I don't let no woman tell me what to do." As security is walking him off the tables, he looks me dead in the eye and says, "You better watch your back. I'll get my $2,000 back from this guy one way or another." After the altercation, he was banned for the next 30 days. Surely enough, after the 30th day, he was back on my table. I asked the boss if I can avoid the table because of our past interaction. My boss tells me he will keep an eye out on him and I'll be fine. So I get to the table and he just stares me down. I start dealing and he's winning. About 20 minutes into my 30 minutes on the table, he says to me, "Boy, am I glad you're paying me because I have a knife in my boot and I was planning on stabbing you." After my 30 minutes was up, I immediately notified my boss what he said. Security then taken him back, and sure enough, there was an 8-inch Bowie knife in his boot. This time he was given a life ban. Creepy, psychotic 90s phone calls and the police's ridiculous answer by Braju LA 123. This happened in the early 90s in Uruguay. My mum started receiving calls as soon as my dad left on a business trip to Spain. The calls usually started at around 11 PM. At first it was heavy breathing and mumbling. Eventually, a muffled voice would say her name and hang up. Things got weird when the calls started to involve my older sister, who back then was 10 or 11. They were saying that they were going to wait for her to get out of school and to beat her up. From that very day on, my mum would walk her to school daily and wait for her to go into class. When my mum got home, she received a call saying how pretty they looked today and described my sister's outfit, saying it was going to be a shame that it would end up covered in blood later. My mum called the police and they eventually found out who it was, but never revealed the name to my mum. They said they couldn't reveal the name of the stalker to avoid retaliation. They assured her that everything was under control and that this person would stop bothering us. We never found out who it was, even to this day.
One day, when I was younger, my mum and I visited my aunt's apartment. It's a giant looking house with a side driveway that leads around to the back of a small parking lot for tenants, with the house entrances being off to the side, facing away and hidden from the busy street. I do not remember how old I and my cousin, my aunt's daughter, were, but to the best of my memory, we were both somewhere around the age of 8 and 12, with her being slightly older than I. It was still midday, and we were all hungry, so my mum and my aunt decided to go shopping and were then going to pick up pizza on the way back for us all to eat. Me and my cousin were ecstatic, as we loved pizza. Our parents left, and me and my cousin stay and watch TV with the volume really low while browsing her laptop. It's probably about 25 minutes after our parents left when we start seeing the front door lock shaking. We thought our parents were back home, but then we noticed something suspicious. Instead of the locks of the door quickly turning as if our parents got back, we instead saw that the locks were very slowly turning to unlock. We suddenly both realised it wasn't our parents, and definitely an intruder. We both stare at the front door silently, freaked out and frozen. I always thought those horror movies where the actors stand frozen in fear were like idiots and it was just fake, but it was in this moment that it proved me wrong. As we both stood there, frozen in horror, we saw the top lock finally turn all the way after what felt like half a minute. Then we start to see the bottom lock slowly start to turn. The door was probably half a second from being unlocked completely, when suddenly my cousin breaks free from being frozen in fear and sprints to the door and turns both the locks to prevent the door from being opened. We dared not look out the second story window to see who was trying to get in. We were horrified and stayed quiet, waiting in the living room. We didn't say a word to each other and just sat there on the couch. It was about 15 minutes later until our parents got home, where we told them the whole ordeal and they were shocked. We didn't know what would have happened if my cousin didn't sprint to lock the door, but to this day I can remember very vividly seeing the door lock shaking rapidly and slowly turning. It was definitely very creepy.
Why I Dislike Going to the Pier by Sia Rivi. I'm nervous about posting this, as I have had a couple of creepy encounters, mostly in my late teen years. But the first one I remembered happened when I was 7. I was staying at my grandma's beach house for the summer. It wasn't unusual for me to be out, as my curfew at the time was when the streetlights came on, and it was relatively posh in Southern California where I lived, so I wasn't worried about strangers. I was a kid that had grown up pretty fast. As an only child, it was left to me to entertain myself. So this one afternoon in the late 80s, I was riding my bike up and down the sidewalk. Our beach house was a few blocks down from the pier, and there were always interesting things going on at the pier, which had a lot of shops and things to look at and just drool over. If I was lucky, some shopkeeper would normally give me a seashell or an ice cream or something fun. So I parked my bike, an old banana seat style bike with no gears or anything. So then I just simply began walking. I was walking in and out of some shops, but I then realised that I was being followed. The person following me was a really attractive young guy. He looked to be around 17, and while I was raised to respect people older than me, especially decent looking ones, it started to bother me. Now normally, I wouldn't really pay any attention, but he made my skin crawl. The way he kept looking at me, it gave me goosebumps. I then wandered into a store and went back out, hiding behind some crates and watched to see if he would follow. He did, but on his way, he tripped over some boxes. At this point, he saw me hiding and realised that I knew he was watching me, and he started to chase me. I ran into a crowd of people. He just kept on watching me, running hard after me. I heard him telling folks that I was his little sister and to move out of the way so he could take me home. He kept on shouting, people kept on looking, and I was terrified. At this time, I blurt out that I have no idea who this guy is. I ran through a group of people, losing him for a moment, and then running into a shop and hid behind a counter. I think the sales clerk knew I was scared because the moment the bells clanged to show that somebody had come in the door, I started to shiver and shake my head no. The store clerk guy then told him that he hadn't seen his sister, and he then escorted me out the back. I then immediately went home, but I didn't tell anyone. I was afraid that I'd be in trouble for the fact that he followed me. I remember I hid for hours, eventually falling asleep. Later that night, the news came on, and my grandma would often let me stay up to watch it with him. The breaking news story was that some little girl who had blonde hair like I did, who was 8, also around my age at the time, had been kidnapped off that very pier. I then told my grandparents what had happened, and they talked with a police officer and given a description of what I'd seen. A few months later, they found her body. He Shushed Them by Mutta Mag. This didn't happen directly to me, though I was in the home when it happened. The witness to all of this is my oldest sister, Tori, around 1999. My sister and her friend Chrissy were 16, and Chrissy had just gotten her license. They'd been out joyriding in Chrissy's Davili. We lived in a newer development in a pretty rural area, so there wasn't much else to do for fun. When they got back to our neighbourhood, it was already dark. Chrissy lived about a block away, and so she was going to do a trip to drop Tori off before heading home. Now the house that we lived in had a large extended patio from the front of the house that had trees along either side blocking the view of the driveway. Chrissy stopped the car in front of the driveway, and Tori was about to get out of the car when suddenly Chrissy grabbed her arm. Tori looked back when she suddenly saw a look of fear on Chrissy's face. She turned back towards the house to see what caused this reaction and saw a figure crouched in the shadows between the parked cars. Looking back at them was this man in all black. He wore a black long sleeve shirt, black pants, and most frighteningly, a black ski mask. He was also completely barefoot. He made eye contact with the girls. He raised his finger to his lips and gestured to them to be quiet. Tori then slammed the door shut and they raced to Chrissy's house, where her father called the police and my father. Unfortunately, no trace of this man was ever found. What really frightens me about this occurrence is that my parents, myself, and my younger sister were all at home at the time. I don't know if this guy had any weapons, or if he had moved along when he realised the house was occupied. I'm just glad that my sister came to the house when she did. Oh, I'm sorry, wrong house, by Delanera. When I was 12, my friend and I went to a church swim thing, and afterwards, I would spend the night at her house. To my surprise, her mum wasn't home when I got back. She left a note saying she went to get groceries with my grandparents. I had never been without an adult supervision in my entire life up to that point. I was very much on edge. Their apartment building had the door handle where you punch it in the right pegs, and each apartment had a patio or balcony. Her mum had mobility issues, so their apartment was on the ground floor, and their sliding glass door was right next to the main door of the building. So we're sitting there, watching Nickelodeon, and this man tries to open the sliding door. It was locked. The block of wood was in the track, so it wouldn't budge, and the vertical blinds were halfway shut. After a few seconds, he leaves. Then the inside door opens, but he gets stuck on the chain. We screamed and the man said, "Oh, sorry, wrong house," and then left. My friend relocked the door and said her mum would be home soon. So not even 5 minutes later, the same man puts his hands on the sliding door and looked at us. He made eye contact with me, smiled, and then started pulling on the handle. "Let me in, I need to talk to you." We both screamed and said that the police were called, and then he ran off. About 10 minutes later, her mum and grandparents came home and we told them about it. They were mad we hadn't actually called the police, but we didn't care. It was over. Except it wasn't. Her mum was sitting in her motorized recliner, and she was a large woman, scary as hell when mad too. We then heard a metal clicking sound, and the door was opened. He was standing there, bug-eyed at seeing my friend's big mum. She said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Sorry, wrong house," and ran. Her mum called the police this time, and the police said he obviously knew somebody in the building since he knew the pegs and how they opened. But he also had some lockpicking stuff on him because the doorknob showed signs of tampering. The police never actually found out who he was either. Always Trust Your Dog by Burn Phoenix. I'll start by talking about my pup. Charlie is a 1-year-old English Shepherd, and since she moved out from my parents' house to live with me, she's had some very nervous tendencies. I know it's simply because we live on the first floor in an apartment complex, so there's always people outside. During the day, she's calm and fine, but as soon as it's getting dark, she gets edgy. She sits in the window and pushes the blinds aside so she can watch people milling around. She has spent so much time in this spot that she's actually chewed a hole in the blinds so she can sit more comfortably and stay on guard. Usually, I'm pretty annoyed when she gets aggressive. There's no need for her to walk around the house with her chest puffed up, and it's simply the neighbours coming home late. Tonight, however, this was different. I was hanging out on the couch with my back to the window. It's a large window, and due to our college budget, we don't have a curtain, just the aforementioned chewed blinds. Charlie was laying on the floor at my feet, intensely watching me munch on my popcorn. She suddenly stood up and started growling aggressively. I went to look at the window and noticed that there was a shadow walking outside. The neighbours were coming home as per usual. I tried to calm Chuck, rubbing her ears and reassuring her it was alright. She wasn't having it. She jumped on the back of the couch and her growling intensified. I told her to go and lie down in her kennel, and she suddenly walked off. I then stood quiet for a second, trying to listen to the sound of her nosing open the kennel door, but I didn't hear it. I leant over to try and see where she was, and I found her pacing by my front doormat. Thinking maybe she needed to pee, I stood up, and she quickly looked at me pointedly and softly growled. She then turned around and ever so quietly started sniffing the door frame. She would sniff and suddenly snort while shaking her head. I crept over to the big window and tried to pull down the blinds so I could peer out. At my door, I saw a figure. Now it's almost midnight here, so it's dark as hell. This figure was large. I'm assuming it was a man, and they were just standing at the door. When I saw him, I flipped out. I started flicking the porch lights on and off, and the guy turned and jogged away. Needless to say, Chuck got all the treats and love that he deserved. He is now sleeping on my pillow with me tonight. I'm hoping that the creepy guy doesn't come back though. To whoever tried to break into my house tonight, by Derpy McMuffin 89. First, I need to provide a little backstory. I recently moved in with my partner and we both have a dog each. My dog is my baby and my protector. She lets me know when somebody is on my property that she doesn't know. My partner had just left the country for 2 weeks, so I was home alone. Though I was winding down from a long day of various appointments and about to sit down for a late dinner with a nice glass of wine, I'm in my 90s and getting comfy when there's a knock on my door. It's my neighbour. He seems very concerned. Him. I don't want to alarm you or anything, but I'm pretty sure I just saw somebody hop into your yard. You might just want to pop out there for a second and check on your dogs because they're not really this quiet often. It's pretty scary, to be honest. Me. Oh, okay. Thanks. I'm gonna go and check it out now. Cue me turning on the spotlight toward the backyard. I lit up the whole of it. And I don't see anyone, but my dog is very agitated and she's not responding to me calling her. I didn't actually go outside as I'm only a tiny woman and completely defenseless against an attacker, so I quickly close and lock all my doors and ring my mum in a panic. My mum then calls the police, who come round very quickly to my place and investigate the backyard. No one was there, but there were signs that somebody was. They were either cutting through my backyard to get to another house, or they were waiting there scoping it out. I was very freaked out. Now all was well until the police went to leave through the side gate. The officers opened the gate and my dog, who knows not to go near it when it's open and doesn't usually run away, bolts past the officers and onto the road. She wasn't responding to my calling and she was spooked out. It was completely out of character for her. I live on a main road and the moment she ran onto the road, she got hit by a car going at around 60 kilometers per hour. Cue much panic and crying and rushing to get her to a vet. Thankfully, she's okay. But where on earth was my dog running to? What spooked her out so much?
My friend introduced me to Let's Not Meet and encouraged me to post a story. This story takes place a few years back when I was still rather new to the whole cop thing. I had recently moved into a new apartment building not too far from my place of work. The landlord was a relatively nice man. If you had a reason for not getting your rent in on time, he understood. His son, however, was a huge dickhead. He lived with his father, unemployed and lazy, and would frequently wander the building. He often hit on female tenants, cornering them and talking to them, or even trying to follow them into their apartments on some occasions. He'd get fairly upset when he was rejected, and would often stay on that particular floor for up to a month after rejection, watching her come and go and riding in the elevator with. My neighbor was once so scared that she would ask me to walk her out, but he was relatively harmless. He never raised a hand to a woman. Then the burglaries started. People started complaining of missing small things like a couple bucks, a piece of jewelry, maybe a video or two, but there was no evidence, no security camera footage, no signs of a break-in. Then certain things started going missing from the female tenants' apartments. Perfume, a piece of clothing here or there. It got really messed up. Way back then, I worked nights. I would often come home from work in the wee hours of the morning and pass out in my bed. But there was always something I would do before that. I'd lock my bedroom door. After growing up with two older siblings who didn't much respect me at all, I started locking my door because they'd often barge in without knocking. I guess this translated into adulthood as well, and I'm glad it did. I had the night off one night and was using that night to catch up on much needed sleep when I heard it. It was fuzzy at first, but the second go around I heard it, it was loud and clear. Someone was trying to turn the doorknob on my bedroom door. I heard the doorknob jiggle again and heard a soft fuck before I got out of bed slowly and quietly. I own a few firearms, rifles, a shotgun, a few handguns, but they were all stored safely in a locked gun safe, except for one. My favorite revolver that I frequently used for recreational shooting and kept in the bottom drawer of my nightstand. I grab it, check the cylinder. Looks like the fucker in my apartment has a 50% chance of living if I pull the trigger. I hold my gun and listen. The doorknob has stopped jiggling, but I can still hear him out there. I listen at the door and he's definitely no longer there, but I can hear him shuffling around. I ease the door open a crack and look out. He's crouching down observing my video games. I silently creep out of my room and behind him, but far away enough so that I won't get fucked up if he happens to have a weapon. I silently creep out of my room and behind him, but far away enough so that I won't get fucked up if he happens to have a weapon. I tell him to stand up with his hands up. He freezes but does what I tell him to. There's a small pocket knife in his hand. I tell him to put it down and turn towards me with his hands up. He does. And what do you know? It's the landlord's son. He sees my gun and the look on his face is pure terror. I tell him to move away from the knife. He does. I go to pick up the phone, not looking away from him as I dial the number. You don't have to call the... I glare at him and tell him he was stupid enough to break into a cop's house, effectively telling him to shut the fuck up without saying anything. He listens and I finish calling the police. As the cops haul him out, the landlord is looking at him with such disappointment, and it honestly hurt a little. He promises a few months free rent and a few other things, but after that ends, I leave that apartment. I often think about what would have happened if I hadn't locked the door.
The Noise on the Balcony by mock trial with J.R. Reinhold. While we were in graduate school, my husband and I lived in student housing in a large apartment complex. It had approximately 60 units. To get into the complex, you needed a key, and you also needed a key to access the stairwell. We were up on the 3rd floor and had a balcony that we shared with our next door neighbours. Because it was a small balcony and not very practical to hang out on, we all primarily used it to store odd items such as bikes and whatnot. So one night around midnight, my husband and I heard an odd clanging noise coming from outside. We ignored this at first because hey, we live in a big apartment complex in a busy area of town. Noises happen. However, the noises continued, and eventually my husband decided he should get out of bed and check it out. He opened the door to the balcony and the noise stopped. He then stepped out and looked around, noticing nothing amiss. He then started to go back inside, and when he happened to glance down at the floor of the balcony, he noticed there were fingerprints wrapped around the lower railing. He did a double take, then peered over the edge to see that there was a guy dressed in all black, wearing a ski mask and a backpack that had a baseball bat thing sticking out of it. So apparently my husband's fight or flight instinct is a bit defective, because he immediately said to him, "Hey, what are you doing?" And apparently, Ski Mask Dude's ninja balcony climbing skills didn't transfer into coming up with a credible story. He replied with, nothing. At this point, my husband snapped back into common sense mode and started to yell for someone to call the cops. The Ski Mask Dude went all parkour style at this point, dropping from balcony to balcony, landing on the ground. He then managed to somehow throw himself over the 8-foot cinder block wall surrounding the complex with lightning speed. The police then come out, looked around, and found nothing. It wasn't until the next day that we discovered that our next door neighbour's bike had vanished the night before. Not only that, the Ski Mask Dude managed to scale up 2 floors of the balconies. He'd actually gotten onto our balcony and gotten the bike off and tried to take it down to the ground. He didn't take it with him when he left though, but it was also there when the cops looked around that they found that he wasn't alone at night. We then got security cameras installed at the complex within the week and there were no other incidents. I just wonder what he was doing with that bat and what he would have done had my husband not seen him first. I didn't realise how scary this was until years later. My lady kitten farts. In college, I lived with my mum and aunt. We had a house on a hill in the woods. You had to drive up to get to the garage and front yard sloped down to the left that exposed all floors of a pretty turret on the side of the house. To get to the front door, you had to step onto a wooden walkway that followed along the whole left side of the garage. There was about 4 feet between the bottom of the sidewalk and the ground underneath. I got home late one night and saw my aunt's light was still on. She was a night owl like I am. I pulled in, parked and walked up to the front door. It was dark, but I could see there was something wrong with the doorknob. It was hanging out of the door and the screws were mostly out. I unlocked the deadbolt, locked it again and went upstairs to ask my aunt what had happened to the doorknob. She looked at me really confused. She told me that she had just been out there smoking and it was fine. I told her it was broken and she agreed that it could have literally only have happened minutes before and she didn't even seem to notice anything out of the ordinary. So we both go downstairs and I show her the door. Her face then turned white. We realised that in the time between her shutting the door and me getting into it, somebody had tried to break in by pulling the locks out. We had many more instances after that. Somebody was stalking us, but we never found out who it was. What was really scary though was the realisation that the only place that they would have been able to hide was under the walkway that I went up to go and talk to my aunt. They were probably just waiting there under me.
Being from a third world country, you see a lot of shit happening all over the world. You never think it's going to happen to you. After all, you're careful, you know better, you mind your own business, and everything is going to be 5 by 5. My mum is one of the strongest women I know. She's one of 15 siblings, which I think toughened her up and made her a woman of strong morals and a no-nonsense attitude. She is one of the oldest of her siblings, so she has that nurturing mama bear thing down. She'll take crap from no one, and when confronted with fight or flight, she'll fight every single time. Like the one time my mum was picking up my sisters from kindergarten, and some asshole tried to snatch her purse. She took notice of him walking towards her with no good intentions, and she told my sisters to hold on to her skirt, and when the man made his move, she pressed her thumbs up against the man's eyes and scratched him wherever she could reach him. She's gotten mellower now in her later life, but for me she's still the epitome of love and strength. This is a story of how I almost lost my mum to road rage. I was 10, it was a Sunday, and I had gone to the swimming pool with my friends. My dad was supposed to pick me up at around 5 PM. By 7 PM I was fuming, angry, and decided to walk back to my house. It's probably a 20-minute walk. I got home and was mad, and my sisters were scolding me because it was dark and it was dangerous for a 10-year-old to be walking home on his own, and that dad had gone to pick me up like 5 minutes ago. I didn't care, I was pissed off, and I just walked into my parents' room to give my mum a piece of my mind because I couldn't tell dad off, and I found her sobbing and in distress. I was asking her what was going on. She was angry at my dad and she didn't want to talk to him again. My anger faded and my curiosity struck instead. Turns out at around 4:30 PM, when my dad was going to pick me up, he was coming back from his farm and some dude cut him off, and my dad, who unfortunately had some road rage, honked his horn, pulled down the window on my mum's side and yelled at him. The dude in the other car lowered his window, pulled a gun out and started shooting at my dad's car. My dad hit the brakes and let the other car pull further away. They stopped and got out the car to catch their breath, and that's when my mum saw a hole in the space between the passenger front door and the passenger back door. A bullet nearly missed my mum's head and she was hysterical. They got home and my mum broke down and my dad had to calm her down, thus he was pretty late for picking me up. It's probably not as scary as some of the other stuff people post here, but the thought that I may have lost my mum at the age of 10 scared me shitless. It's been 20 years since that day, and sometimes it randomly pops into my head, and I have to talk myself off the ledge when I wonder, what if?
Accidental Creeper by Keen Edge 422. A 6'4", 400 pounds, hulking mass of a man. Alright. I've never been one to be concerned about walking alone at night. I really can't fathom somebody trying to creep on me, and I'm not what anybody would call a prime mugging target. Because of this, I tend to not notice what would be more immediately apparent to others as a scary situation. Sometimes even when I'm making it scary. So in the winter, my work schedule means that it's dark by the time I leave to go home. I work on a college campus and the parking deck I'm assigned to is about half a mile away from my office, and it's winter after all. So I huddle up in a hoodie and jacket, which are both black, because I'm fat and black is supposed to be slimming, as well as a pair of gloves. About halfway along the walk to my car, I sort of fall into fair distance behind a petite young woman heading in the same direction. Because I have a relatively long stride compared to hers, it doesn't take long for me to start closing the distance. Still, obviously to the picture I'm accidentally painting in her mind, I notice her looking over her shoulder a couple of times. I just give a smile and a little wave. Finally, after way too long, it occurs to me that, oh man, maybe it's weird for her to have somebody walking behind her at night. So my brilliant solution, yeah I know, was to speed up because obviously once I pass her, she won't think I'm following her, right? Yeah, so that goes exactly how any rational person would imagine. As soon as she realises that I've sped up, she breaks into a full run down the sidewalk, across the street and right into the parking deck. The exact same parking deck where I'm parked. I feel bad that I clearly scared this girl, but I figured it's at a point, so I might as well continue to the deck and hope she's in the elevator. Unfortunately, what I didn't know was that she was also on the top floor and had opted to take the stairs, so the timing worked out so that I got out of the elevator about 15 feet behind her. She had spun around at the sound of the elevator and her face went white when I stepped out. She looked like she was about to scream. I just threw up my hands and said no wait, and clicked the button on my keyring to make my car chirp behind her. She then looked behind at my all lit up car and started laughing. She then got out her keys and the car directly in front of mine lit up as well. On the small handful of cars that were on that level, as were next to each other. I apologise for having scared her so much and we had a good laugh, but I'm pretty sure I aged her a few years in that night. She still did insist that I leave first and I was happy to see her turn the opposite direction before leaving the deck. Nowadays, I try and remember how I look and that I might easily scare someone. I'm just thankful that she didn't have any pepper spray. Creep Used to Be My Neighbour by Parrot Ashley. When me and my husband first moved out on our own, we had this neighbour we would sometimes see outside and would talk to. We even went to the local pool hall and played pool with him. One day, we were hanging out at his house and we were sitting outside. The cutest little kitten then walks up in the yard. My husband and I are animal lovers, so I'm all about this kitten. My husband and neighbour then walk to the side of the house. They're gone for maybe about a minute or two, and my husband returns. Now, the look on his face was that of both horror and fury. He looks at me and says, "He killed that cat." I get up and walk around there, and my husband is holding this kitten. The neighbour had hit him in the head with a rock, but at this point, the cat's still breathing. It had knocked him out. Long story short, we took that kitten to the vet and it had to have an eye taken out. And that was our kitten. We've had it for about 10 years now, and he's one good mouse killer. We found out a few years later that this neighbour had been out of town for work and was rooming with a co-worker. He later went on to stab his roommate to death and return back to his home here. It's scary to believe somebody like this lived right beside us and had actually been in our house before. Obviously, after the kitten thing happened, we stopped talking to him after letting him know what we thought about what he had done.
Okay, so a little bit of backstory. I'm a 19-year-old male, was about 10 when this took place. I spent a large part of my childhood living in a town called Renfrew, Ontario, Canada, with my mom and her fiancé at the time. It was a pretty average-sized town, calm, peaceful, and a relatively nice place. We lived in a house on a street that I believe was called Stewart Street. Life was pretty normal for the most part. Our driveway and our neighbor's driveway were both connected, so we had to park beside each other, and both houses were pretty close to each other. I never saw much of my neighbor other than the occasional time that he wasn't in his backyard, probably tending to his garden. He was a middle-aged man, about 40 or 50, and he never said hello or acknowledged me or my family when we looked at him or even walked past him in the driveway. Everything continued as normal as ever, until one night when I headed into my room to go to bed. My room had one window, and it faced out towards the driveway. I had blinds, but they were always slightly open so that I could see through the open gaps. On this night, as I lay in bed, I could hear crunching in the gravel on the driveway. I never thought anything of it and assumed it was probably my mom's fiancé outside doing something. But no, I was very wrong. I turned over in my bed to face my window, and as my eyes slowly adjusted in the dark, I could see through the gaps of the blinds, and there was a pale face looking through my window, staring directly at me. I made eye contact and I couldn't look away. I was so horrified that I almost wet the bed. I tried to scream out for my mom, but I was too scared of him hearing me and breaking through the window. He continued to stare, but it was almost as though he was looking off into the distance towards me, like someone who was zoned out. Finally, he slowly raised his head up to the roof, and he started fucking screaming at the top of his lungs. "Shut up, you fucking birds! Shut the fuck up! Shut up, you motherfuckers!" The second he started screaming, I got chills. The creepiest part of it all was that there were no birds. No birds chirping, no noise, nothing. Other than him. His screaming was so serious and so full of rage that it felt as though he was legitimately enraged by these imaginary birds. Somehow, everyone in the house except me managed to sleep through the screaming, which went on for almost the entire night. I did not sleep a wink, and the man didn't leave my window until around 4 a.m. When morning came, I was far too scared to tell my mother about what had happened. I just went about as I usually did. The door we entered the house from was in the backyard, which meant when we left, we had to walk through the driveway. Usually, my neighbor was never outside, but one day I was walking to school. He was standing in the driveway about to get in his car. I did my best to look down and avoid him, walking as close to the wall of my house as possible. When I noticed out of my peripherals that he was standing completely still, holding his car door open, watching me walk, my eyes naturally darted toward him, and I could see his eyes watching me, full of something I can only describe as intent. His nighttime screaming continued, always telling the fucking birds to shut up, occurring about every other night. On the nights that he didn't show up, I had chronic nightmares about him opening my window, and my grades started to suffer. I was in a constant state of terror. Eventually, I realized that I had no choice but to tell my mom what was going on. I woke up after one of my nightmares and went into her room and told her about our neighbor. She attempted to assure me that I was imagining it and that I was only dreaming. The rest of the story is from what my mom told me years later when I was much older, because I was too young to hear about it. After I told my mother about what was happening, she and her fiancé decided they should closely pay attention to our neighbor. One night they were having a few drinks and playing frisbee in the backyard. My mom threw the frisbee and it landed on the grass in our neighbor's yard. Mom walked right on over into the yard, there was no fence separating us, and picked up the frisbee. It landed quite close to the neighbor's window. She bent down to pick it up, and as she stood back up, she caught a glimpse in the window into the kitchen of the house. The entire kitchen counter was covered in porn magazines. Sex toys were strewn about. My mom and her fiance started freaking out, assuming he was a pedophile or something, and they marched straight to his door and started banging on it. The door had a window and they could see the neighbor through it in the hallway, but he looked different somehow. He turned around, shocked by the loud banging, and revealed a face covered in makeup, bright red lipstick, mascara, women's clothes, etc. This man was a cross-dresser. Normally it wouldn't be such a big deal, but there was clearly something wrong with this man. Every alarm was going off and my mom felt as though he may have someone in the basement or something. He ran away and then came back and answered the door a few minutes later, face washed and regular clothes on. My mom and her fiance flipped out on him and asking him why he was screaming at my window, what was with all the porn, etc. I was never told what he replied to all of this. My mom called the cops and they ended up coming and searching his house. Inside, they found tons of child porn. I have an idea of what that man wanted with me, but I have no idea what he was on about with the birds. Clearly, he had some sort of mental condition. All I can really say is that I am so fucking glad I don't live there anymore. I have a few more stories of that town because it was full of creeps for some reason, but those are for another day.
Just writing this down to document. A sheriff pulled me over 2 nights ago, noting that he knows my apartment complex well. Tonight he was parked there and followed me by mind your busyness. He pulled me over for my headlight being out. I was nervous and shaking but didn't do anything wrong. I wasn't looking for trouble. When he asked, I mentioned that I was heading to a party. He seemed nice enough and gave me some advice and also made note that I lived in a Pacific apartment complex. I didn't think anything out of the ordinary. Tonight, I noticed a sheriff parked by our leasing office and I passed him as I drove round to my entrance. I have to park further away because some of the spots are filled up and he ends up driving past me on the side of the road I was parked on. As I'm carrying groceries towards my complex, he drives by again slowly. I stopped walking as I lost sight of him behind some cars and it sounded like he stopped accelerating in order to see me walk towards my apartment. Either way, he knows which building I'm in now and it was truly him following me. He also has access to all of my personal information. God knows what he wants or what he's intending to do. I just hope it doesn't get worse after tonight.
A couple of years back, when I was in college, I was the victim of a long-term stalker. This is a pretty long story, and really builds on itself. I have cut it down to be a bit more coherent, but I have not changed any facts. Also, quick note in the texting sessions, the things I say are always prefaced with me. The other stuff in quotes is the stalker. Also, I'm a male and was 20 at the time. It started out fairly innocuous. On Valentine's Day, I started to receive secret admirer type text messages from an unknown number. I assumed it was a friend of mine playing a joke, as I was in a room with a handful of tech savvy people at the time. I tried to gauge their reactions and asked if anyone was messing with me. They all denied it, and I believed them. They're pretty bad liars. It was further confirmed that it was none of them when I got a phone call from the number. A voice on the other end said,
"Is this?"
my name. I replied, "Yeah, who's this?" hoping I could identify the voice. At that point, they hung up and resumed texting. At the time, a lot of my friends lived together, and the people who didn't live there and enjoyed pranks weren't really committed or knowledgeable enough to sign up for a fake number texting service. Things started to get weird when the person began asking pretty personal questions, including repeatedly asking,
Are you doing something tonight?
to which I replied, yes, I was working. But they kept insisting we should meet up. On top of all this, I was getting various images sent to me from a separate email, username @textnow.me. This confirmed it wasn't a real number, and I now had a username to connect to the person. I don't know if it was their intention, but I actually enjoy trying to figure out shit like this, and took it upon myself to expose this person without giving away anything about myself. So I kept it up. I texted them back for a while and dug more and more information out the person, compiling it into a profile and eliminating possibilities. Unfortunately, this just encouraged them, as they insisted I send pictures,
Take pics. Pics add to the convo.
etc. Then they sent a weird one. A white lacy dress hanging in their closet, with the accompanying text,
My wedding dress for when I marry you.
various heart and love emojis.
Pic of your reaction.
Me, no.
Why not, please? Pics of your surroundings, please. Your room, your face, anything more.
Me, you gotta tell me who you are, otherwise I'm definitely not sending you any pictures.
I'm not telling you who I am until I feel comfortable.
You've gotta be fucking kidding me. You're the one who's uncomfortable. They continued to pry about where I was going to be that evening, and I still refused to give details. They then dropped where they were going to be, a party on campus that night. I couldn't go regardless, I was working. I should also mention that the texting conversation was all over the place. It was like 3 different people were all trying to talk to me about different things all at once. Again, I was bombarded with personal questions about past relationships and what kind of girl do you find yourself most attracted to. There was a little bit of back and forth, nothing too interesting. Then I got another bombshell. They asked if I lived in apartment 68, which I did. I lied. Me, close but not quite.
Oh, could have sworn. Where do you live? Are you involved with anyone at the moment?
I recognised the style of apartment they were in, based on a picture from earlier, so I decided to throw a curveball. You live in this complex, right?
What? How do you know?
Me. I recognise your door. All the shitty apartments had the same colour door frame, which was visible in the edge of a picture they sent me. The conversation kind of fizzled out here. I didn't go to that party, and I didn't get any more texts. Among the pictures they sent me were some screenshots of my Facebook, photos of their bed, a pipe, some posters, pretty boring stuff. So that was February. Fast forward to October, the following school year. I was a senior and busy as fuck. One evening I got a text from an unknown number.
This is...
My full name. I played dumb, pretending like I wasn't freaking out. After many months, this person was contacting me again, and I still hadn't figured out who it was. These questions were instantly more personal, and really weirded me out.
Don't ruin the fun. Not knowing who I am is part of the mystery. I won't tell you who I am. Not now. Too much to lose. I don't want you to know. Not because I'm being cruel. It's just better if you don't know.
Me. That doesn't make sense.
Trust me. You don't want to know. You're better off not knowing. Trust me.
Me. Okay, whatever. Why are you texting me again?
Are you mad at me? I just have no one to talk to. Does my personhood really matter? Can we talk about something else?
Me. Like what? At this point I'm pretty tired of this shit, and trying to work, but I do want to see if I can pick out any more details, so I'm doing the bare minimum to keep this going.
Do you celebrate Halloween? I guess I'm boring you. I have a better question. Have you ever been in love?
Me. No.
How do you know it if you've never experienced it? For a response so extreme, you would think you've experienced it before, but I guess it's a matter of perspective. You must be a godly man then.
These texts are coming as fast as I can keep up.
Was that too harsh?
Me.
What response? Bye.
Explosions and violin emojis. The next day, around the same time, I got another text. Keep in mind the person is referring to their friend, but I honestly believe this friend is made up.
I was talking to my friend about you today.
Me. Who's your friend?
Don't you want to know what we talked about?
Me. Yeah, sure. Then like 3 hours later they replied.
We just talked about how you seem like the type of person to fall in love quickly. You're a sap. Not in a negative way. Just an observation. You're like wishing for the one.
Me. Lol.
All you care about is finding my identity. That would be the most awkward thing ever. Why so eager? Wouldn't you be weirded out?
Me. No, probably not. This was a lie.
We've been in class before.
Me. What year?
Maybe if you got to know me, you'd figure it out.
Me. Okay, tell me about yourself.
Hey, why didn't you comment about the observation my friend and I made? Say how you feel.
Me. What does that even mean?
Say how you feel. This makes me uncomfortable. You never asked me any questions.
I started messing with them, asking really random questions. This made them really mad. Me. Do you like cats? Do you like long walks on the beach?
I live by the beach.
Me. Which one?
A famous one. A lot of people have sex on the beach under a blanket at night.
Me. Near a city.
How do you like...
State of the town I'm from. Me. How do you know I'm from there?
The internet is my best friend. Are you nervous? You're just a boy. You're boyish. Let's admit it, nothing bad. It's cute. How old are you?
Me. You haven't figured that out already?
When's your birthday? The month and day, please. Tell me now. I just want to know your sign.
Me. Virgo.
Oh my god, I like Virgos. You're obedient, submissive, like a puppy dog. Isn't that funny? I just laughed. Now I ask you a question. Have you been in a relationship before? Why did your relationship fail?
Me. I'm not telling you about this. This is annoying. Then they sent a ton of different photos from Google.
My friend asked me to ask you something, but I don't think I will.
Me. What?
Can we change subjects now? How was your day? Mine was bad, but I don't want to relive it again. It was something I did wrong, so I have myself to blame. She wanted to ask something intimate, but I'm not going to share, since you don't like talking about that. It's extreme, you're probably not going to answer. I feel sick asking it. You don't have me. I'm just the messenger. I'm embarrassed. You're not going to answer.
Me. I could.
Okay, so... we really want to know if you're a virgin or not. Scratch the virgin part. Ever had intercourse is a better phrase. I knew you wouldn't answer.
I didn't answer, and they didn't write anything else. This was all October. This is December, the end of semester.
Hey,
Me. Who is this?
it's me. I can tell you who I am when I leave campus. I'm never going to see you again, but I can tell you who I am.
Me. Alright, tell me.
When I leave campus, I'm never going to see you again. I'm going to be gone. You're so serious. Hello? I'm leaving next week, so you're ruining it though. Now I just want to punch you. Sorry, I didn't mean to send that. I'm sorry. Oops.
Then they proceeded to call me multiple times. I denied every call, but they kept coming. I think there were 14 calls that night. Then a text from a new fake number. Oh my god. Sent from textnow.com. Me. Please, can you stop texting me? Then there were more calls, so I turned off my phone. The following week, I was in the class ITAD. Students were presenting their final work on the projector, and I had queued multiple tabs on the projection computer. 2 different students had work on Google Drive. When the second student logged into their account, they didn't open a private window, so it logged on to their first student. Hope that makes sense. I saw this happen, but the first student wasn't in the room, so when she came back, I asked her to re-log in. We were both standing in the projection booth. She was on one end of the computer, and I was messing with the sound system and the other side. She was at one end on the computer, and I was messing with the sound system on the other side, but happened to turn and look at the projector screen when she was logging into Google. This hit me like a ton of bricks. The username she logged in with was the same username as a TextNow account that had been sending me photos. I quickly turned away and pretended to be busy with something until she finished opening her work. I thanked her and she left the booth without realizing her mistake. I tried to play it cool, but inside I was going crazy for the rest of class. After almost a year, I knew who it was. She finally slipped up, and honestly, I was more scared now than I ever had been. This person had a history of being pretty creepy around my friends, and although she had never personally interacted with me outside of class, all my friends had strange experiences. Side note, here are 2 abbreviated ones to fully illustrate the craziness. My friend Michael was working endlessly on his thesis in the building. He was about 50 hours into a no-sleep work binge, and it's like 7 AM. She walks in and starts working on a computer in the lab. Another guy, Dave, comes in and remarks about Michael. "You're still here." Michael said, "I've been working for days, starting to see things out the corner of my eye. Sometimes I see a tall man in a suit." She immediately turns around and says, "You see him too?" Michael has no idea what to say, and Dave makes a joke about it being a ghost of the building. Michael has no idea what to say, and Dave just makes a joke about it being the ghost of the building. She doesn't say anything and goes back to work. Another friend, Isaac, also worked late in the building, and sometimes would find her waiting outside the door around 3 AM, and she would follow him home. Occasionally she showed up outside his door at night, and demanded to be let in. One time, while I was actually at his place, she came to the back door with a peephole and knocked for upwards of 20 minutes. We pretended to not be at home and shut all the blinds on the front of the house and went upstairs. There's plenty more to tell about their interactions, including one where she attacked him at a party, but that's delving way into another story. So the point being, she kind of had a reputation in our friend group, and we generally tried to keep our distance. I had always assumed I was immune. Sorry to say, there's really no conclusion to the story. Someone advised me to file a complaint with the school and try and get a restraining order or something. I figured if we all talked to someone and explained our experiences, we could at least keep her from showing up at our front door. I had a meeting with a counsellor who seemed to really care and offered to look into it. A couple of weeks later, emailed me saying, "This student is going to be abroad next semester, so we're not going to do anything." I insisted that at least something temporary be put in place, and that although I was graduating at the end of the year, Isaac would be returning for 1 more year. Michael had graduated the year before me. They didn't do anything, but what did I expect? This school is pretty notorious for not giving a shit. I didn't run into her again, she hasn't texted me, and Isaac ended up taking a year off. So for the time being, this is where the story ends. I do have screenshots and all the photos, but I'm hesitant to share them in the interest of anonymity. Thanks for understanding.
Hello.